The Taming of the Shrew. Approximately in 1590 on the London stage was staged a play called The Taming of One Shrew. The author of the play is unknown. It described the taming of the husband of the obstinate wife, a story very popular in the Middle Ages. We have already mentioned the following episode from one English mystery of the 15th century. Noah, warned by an angel about the impending flood, is building an ark. And the ark is ready. The sky darkened, the waters rustled. But Noah's wife is busy chattering with the gossips in the ark, and she does not want to hear. Her husband's persuasions do not work for her. Then Noah takes a stick and beats a stern wife. And she, becoming nice and obedient, submissively enters the ark. The play, The Taming of One Shrew, in many ways resembles its primitive prototype. This rough play was successfully played in the London stage by an actor's trumpet, known as Servant of the Earl of Pembroke. The plot was to be liked not only by the people of the old medieval warehouse, but also by the Puritans, who also preached the blind obedience of the woman. Let the wife fear her husband. Servants of the Lord Chamberlain, naturally, became interested in the play, and Shakespeare took up its processing. Processing it, he at the root of her changed. In the old bellows, he poured in new wine. It was not immediately possible for the commentators and executors of The Taming of the Shrew to discover this new Shakespeare content. We do not know anything about how this comedy was performed on the stage of the Shakespeare era. But on the English scene of the X8th century it was performed as a primitive farce, and it was usually put in alterations. The spirit of the farce is completely imbued. For example, the alteration of Garrick, 1754. The following characteristic episode is associated with this alteration. The actor Petruchio actor Woodworth hated the performer Catherine actress Clive. During the performance, he was so carried away by the taming that Caterina was knocked to the floor and drove a fork into her hand. This episode speaks eloquently of how the taming of Caterina was understood at that time. In the 19th century, the traditional image of Petruchio, a rude soldier with a big beard, a sunburned face, long hair, waving a huge whip attribute of the trainer, was formed on the European stage. This trainer and to this day strolls through the scenes of English and American theaters. A decisive step towards revising the whole concept as a whole was made by the remarkable Russian actors G. N. Fedotova, 1846-1925, and A. P. Lenski, 1847-1908. In the performance of Lenski, according to contemporaries, Petruchio rather does not tame Caterina with brutal violence, but pacifies her with love. To prepare such a pacification, Fedotova immediately showed that, Caterina, in fact, the girl is not evil, but only embittered. Katharina, performed by Fedotova, suffocated in a stuffy atmosphere reigning in the Baptist house. Her obstinacy was an expression of protest. This interpretation, leading Shakespeare's play from the farce plan to the plan for a great realistic comedy, was continued and developed by the Soviet theater in the productions of A. P. Popov, Moscow Central Theater of the Red Army, 1939, U. A. Zavadsky, Rostov, Gorky Theater, 1939, and M. V. Korabelnik, Gorky Theater, 1944. These performances in many ways made it possible to better understand this early comedy of Shakespeare, to deeper reveal its content and to see in it really what is written in the Shakespearean text. See collection of The Masters of Theatre in Shakespeare's Images. WTO Publishing, M. L. 1939, pages 120-123. See the collection, The Taming of the Shrew, at the Central Theater of the Red Army. Ist, WTO, M. 1940. Shakespeare's Caterina is a strong and passionate nature. Her stubbornness really takes the form of an unbridled and frantic one. She's a devil in a skirt. It's not for nothing that Caterina's accursed. Her name is in the circle, but at the same time her obstinacy is not her natural trait. It's, so to speak, her mood, her humor, as they said in the Shakespearean era, and Petruchio, having understood the nature of Caterina, arranges a parody of her humor. He conquers it with her own humor, as Petruchio says of one of his servants. Peter Petruchio plays Caterina, and in this raffle take part all his servants, starting with the smart dwarf Gromio, and seeing herself in a caricature mirror. Caterina refuses her humor, from her obstinacy, and at the end of the comedy pronounces a monologue stating that wives must obey their husbands and serve them. Does it follow that Shakespeare shared the views expressed in this monologue, is not the point here, for this monologue is spoken by Catherine, not by Shakespeare. The fact is that a strong and passionate nature, a violent obstinate, turned out to be very soft and pliant person after all. Here is her sister Bianca, the direct opposite of her. In appearance she is a real angel, but she did not have time to get married, as with everyone calls her husband a fool. She is the real stubborn. In short, using the terminology typical of Shakespeare, clothes do not correspond to nature. The Taming of the Shrew in the production of the Central Theatre of the Red Army. Scene on the road. This topic in the future found in Shakespeare its deepening and development. We will find it in tragedies. Under the appearance of the black Othello, a noble heart beats, and under the friendly appearance of the honest Iago lies a black betrayal. Is not the same theme heard in the King Lear? The old king is wrapped up in the clothes of a false worldview, but in the nocturnal step he tears off his clothes, a symbolism typical of Shakespeare, and sees the undisguised truth of reality, the terrible face of a cruel era. Hamlet is not so casually so modestly dressed among the brilliant crowd of courtiers. He denies everything external, ostentatious, everything that only seems, but what really does not exist. When the queen asks him why his father's death seems so extraordinary to him, Hamlet hotly objects. "It seems, lady? No, I do not." But back to the Taming of the Shrew. Petruchio is not wearing lush clothes for his wedding, again the symbolism typical of Shakespeare. She, Caterina, marries me, and not for my clothes, he says. In another scene Petruchio says that the eel is more useful than a venomous snake, although the snake has a beautiful, mottled skin. The lark sings better than the jay, although the jay has beautiful feathers. Clothing does not always correspond to nature, and Shakespeare, tearing the outer covers, shows us the true essence of man. He really is a great denunciator. So, even this early comedy of Shakespeare makes us think about it and reveals a deeper content than it might seem at first glance. In The Taming of the Shrew, everything is very theatrical. Here the action is a play in the play. He is played by visiting actors in front of the copper Slia, who was disguised during his drunken sleep in rich clothes and convinced that he was a nobleman. The Shakespeareans fought a lot over the question, where did Sly finally end up? After all, his remarks are met only at the beginning of the comedy, and then he disappears without a trace. It is more likely that Sly all the time is present at the play and inserts his remarks from time to time, but Shakespeare did not write these remarks, giving in this case complete freedom to improvise the actor. Sly, believing that he really is a nobleman, involuntarily acts, semi-consciously acts a modest, with the quiet, but cunning Bianca. The very obstinacy of Caterina is a kind of hypocrisy. Leocancio and Hortensio, disguised as teachers, are acting, Tranio, dressed in the clothes of his lord Lucentio, a pedant who called himself Venancio, the father of Lucentio. Only Caterina and Petruchio, having fallen in love with one another, seem to come out of this face-acting world and acquire their true nature. This is the central motif of the aforementioned production of U. A. Zawadzki. The Taming of the Shrew is fanned by theatricality, which in part resembles the Italian Comedy of Masks, and some of the images of the play remind the characters of the latter: the clever servant of Tranio, the cunning Brighella, the young old Gremio, the Venetian Pantaloon. This is not accidental. The actors of the Italian Comedy of Masks came to London with their cheerful performances, and Shakespeare probably saw them. But at the same time, as always with Shakespeare, we here, under foreign names, recognize England of that era. Calm, measured, sparse life, reigning in the house of a rich Baptist townsman, a young nobleman Petruchio, who had been abroad. His neglected family castle, where a mass of half-starved servants in their slippery shoes and ragged clothes bask in a cold, damp evening by the flaming fire. A young man who came to the university city and broke free from a quiet hometown renowned for the importance of the townspeople, in other words, from the dull Puritan backwoods. The horror of the old Venancio at the sight of the luxurious clothes of Tranio. Ah, immortal gods! Ah, swindler! Silk jacket. Velvet trousers. I'm ruined. I'm ruined. I'm at home, carefully at home, and my son and his servant spend every half a dozen university. In all this we learn live observations of the reality that surrounded Shakespeare and from which he first of all took the flesh and blood of his works.